Every day, your words determine whether opportunities open or remain firmly shut. In a world where decisions happen in mere seconds, your ability to clearly and persuasively communicate isn't just beneficial, it's critical. Whether you're pitching to potential clients, rallying your team around a vision, or securing a crucial deal, your choice of words either sparks action or creates resistance. The stakes are high. Unclear communication slows decision-making, erodes trust, and leaves even the strongest ideas unnoticed and undervalued. But what if you had a systematic, science-backed approach to transform ordinary messages into compelling calls to action? What if you could adopt the proven communication strategies used by legendary leaders like Steve Jobs, Warren Buffett, and Barack Obama? In How to Speak Smart, the science of words that persuade, you'll learn how even small changes in your wording can greatly increase your influence. You'll discover a simple, yet powerful 7-step method to turn any message into an irresistibly persuasive one. Along the way, you'll see real-world examples of how iconic leaders consistently influenced millions by mastering these techniques. And importantly, you'll understand why complicated, abstract language can hurt your credibility, learning instead to communicate with precise, compelling clarity. Even if you've previously struggled with communication or dread public speaking, this book provides a proven path to confidently command attention, inspire trust, and get the yes you're looking for. Your words are your greatest tool. It's time to sharpen them and finally achieve the outcomes you deserve. Let's get started. Chapter 1, High Stakes. Your investor just asked for a 2-minute update on Q3 numbers. Your team lead wants a quick overview of the new pricing strategy. The board needs to understand why this product pivot makes sense, in 5 slides or less. The clock starts now. And in those first 30 seconds, before you've shared a single data point or strategic insight, the room has already decided whether you're worth listening to. This isn't about having the right ideas anymore. You probably do. It's about having the right words to make those ideas feel obvious, urgent, and actionable. Because in a world where attention spans shrink and decision cycles accelerate, your language either creates momentum or kills it. The language trap that's costing you everything. Here's the brutal truth. You have strong ideas wrapped in weak wording. Take this actual email from a Series B founder to potential investors. We're optimizing our go-to-market approach to leverage synergistic opportunities across multiple verticals while maintaining operational excellence and driving sustainable growth trajectories through innovative customer acquisition methodologies. 43 words, 0 concrete meaning. The investor's brain hit a wall at optimizing and never recovered. Now compare that to this. We cut customer acquisition cost from 847 to 312 in 90 days. 3 enterprise clients signed, revenue up 34%. Same update. 20 words, 3 specific claims. The investor leans forward instead of checking their phone. The difference isn't intelligence or strategy, it's processing fluency. Dense, abstract phrases spike cognitive load. Your listener's brain burns energy just trying to decode what you mean, leaving no mental bandwidth for decision-making. They default to no, not because your idea is bad, but because understanding it feels like work. The mixed frame problem. But fuzzy language is just the beginning. Most leaders accidentally sabotage their own proposals by mixing frames within the same conversation. Consider this pitch sequence. This will save us $200,000 annually, gain frame, followed by, if we don't act, we'll lose market share, loss frame. Then, the upside potential is enormous, abstract gain, finishing with competitors are eating our lunch, concrete loss. 4 different lenses, 4 different emotional triggers. The room can't settle on how to feel about the proposal because you keep changing the rules of evaluation. Winners pick one frame and stick with it. They know that a consistent lens creates a clear path to yes. The credibility leak. Then there's the vagueness problem. Hedge words and fuzzy claims don't make you sound humble. They make you sound unprepared. We should probably try to improve our conversion rates somewhat, versus we'll lift conversion from 2.3% to 3.1% by December 15th. The first version invites doubt. The second invites action. Precision signals competence. Vagueness signals guesswork. The compound cost of communication chaos. When your language lacks clarity and consistency, the damage compounds in three predictable ways. First, you get trapped in endless clarification loops. Stakeholders ask follow-up questions not because they're interested, but because they're confused. Meetings multiply, email threads spiral. Simple decisions take weeks because nobody's quite sure what you're actually proposing. Second, you lose pricing power. When value isn't framed precisely, buyers default to cost comparisons. They can't see why your solution is worth more than the cheaper alternative because you haven't given them a clear value anchor. Premium positioning requires premium language. Third, your reputation shifts from strategic thinker to smart but hard to follow. You're still invited to meetings, but you're not driving decisions. People respect your expertise but don't quote your ideas. Your influence plateaus because your message doesn't travel. The 7-move system that changes everything. But here's what happens when you flip the script and master the language of persuasion. Your phrases become shorthand that others quote. Stakeholders default to yes because following your recommendations feels low risk. You get invited earlier into high-stakes conversations because people trust you to frame complex problems clearly. Fair anchors reset value perception in your favor. Specific outcomes justify premium positioning. You make fewer concessions because your rationale is bulletproof. Clear frames shrink decision cycles. Shared language keeps cross-functional teams aligned. Your culture upgrades from endless explainers to confident deciders. This transformation isn't magic, it's method. 7 specific moves that stack into a communication system leaders use to win minds ethically and efficiently. The persuasion stack, how minds actually decide. Understanding how to apply these moves starts with understanding how brains process persuasive messages. Minds don't evaluate everything at once. They follow a predictable sequence. First, ease. Is this easy to understand? If your opening sentence requires mental effort to decode, the brain starts looking for an exit. Processing fluency determines whether your audience stays engaged or checks out. Second, frame. What lens should I use to evaluate this? The first comparison point you provide becomes the anchor for all subsequent judgments. Frame the choice, or the room will frame it for you, usually not in your favor. Third, evidence. Can I trust this claim? Specific numbers with clear sources feel credible. Vague promises feel like marketing. Precision separates professionals from pitchmen. Fourth, memory. Will I remember this tomorrow? Simple. Rhythmic phrases stick. Complex explanations fade. If your core message isn't quotable, it's forgettable. Fifth, motive. Do people like me do this? Social proof reduces perceived risk. Identity alignment creates psychological momentum. Peer behavior predicts personal behavior. Sixth, autonomy. Am I being pressured or respected? Force triggers reactance. Choice preserves dignity. The best persuasion feels like personal discovery, not external coercion. Seventh, meaning. Why does this matter? Stories compress proof into purpose. A well-told case study beats a dozen bullet points because narrative creates emotional resonance and logical structure simultaneously. Reverse this order and you fight uphill in every conversation. Follow it and momentum builds naturally. Winners versus losers, the language divide. The difference between persuasive and forgettable communication comes down to 7 specific choices. Winners use short words. They say cut costs instead of optimize expenditures. They choose fast over expeditious. Simple language feels confident. Complex language feels compensatory. Winners make one claim at a time. They resist the urge to pack everything into a single sentence. One idea per line, one decision per conversation. Clarity beats completeness. Winners cite exact numbers. They say 37% improvement instead of significant gains. They specify by March 15th rather than soon. Precision creates gravity. Winners maintain a steady frame. They pick gain or loss, near or far, now or later, and stick with it throughout the conversation. Consistent lenses create clear choices. Winners show visible proof. They name the peer group, share the outcome, cite the time frame. Social evidence beats personal promises. Winners make respectful asks. They protect autonomy while maintaining authority. I recommend beats I think. Are you open to beats you should. Losers do the opposite. They use jargon when simple words would work. They make 5 claims simultaneously. They cite fuzzy ranges instead of specific deltas. They shift frames mid-conversation. They hide behind invisible proof. They either hedge everything or demand everything. The gap between these approaches isn't subtle. It's the difference between influence and irrelevance. The proof is in the patterns. Consider how the masters apply these principles. Steve Jobs understood anchoring and metaphor. When launching the iPhone, he didn't start with technical specifications. He started with price context. Similar devices cost $999, but we're pricing iPhone at $499. Same product, different perceived value, thanks to strategic anchoring. Then he converted complex technology into simple metaphor. 1,000 songs in your pocket. Not gigabytes or file formats, a life upgrade you could visualize instantly. Warren Buffett built trust through precision and fluency. His annual letters use 8th grade vocabulary to explain billion-dollar decisions. He cites exact thresholds. We need $20 billion in annual earnings before considering major acquisitions. Shareholders repeat his numbers verbatim because they're memorable and credible. Barack Obama mastered anaphora and identity. Yes, we can wasn't just a slogan. It was a priming device that oriented listeners toward possibility before policy details arrived. The patterned repetition made the phrase quotable across millions of conversations. These aren't accidents. They're applications of a systematic approach to persuasive language. Your first win, the 7-move chain. By the time you finish this book, you'll be able to rewrite any mission-critical message using the complete system. Start with Fluent Clarity, one sentence that states your core ask in 18 words or less. Then add frame power, the lens and anchor that shapes how your proposal gets evaluated. Layer in precision proof, exact numbers with a clear because. Prime attention with a focusing question or contrast. Add peer evidence or identity alignment through social levers. Protect autonomy with power politeness. Clear recommendations that preserve choice. Seal everything with story logic. A 30-second case study that makes your point unforgettable. The result, a 60-second pitch that earns concrete next steps instead of vague, "we'll think about it" responses. The path forward. Each chapter ahead builds one layer of this system. Fluent Clarity shows you how to make thinking easy. Frame power teaches you to shape choices before content arrives. Precision proof converts vague promises into quotable evidence. Prime and repeat makes your message stick in memory and spread room to room. Social levers reduces uncertainty through ethical social proof. Power politeness maintains authority while preserving relationships. Story logic compresses your best evidence into memorable narratives that travel without you. Stack these moves and your communication becomes a competitive advantage. Your words start making hard decisions feel obvious. Complex problems become clear choices. Resistance turns into momentum. The stakes are higher than you think. In a world where attention is scarce and decisions are fast, your language either opens doors or closes them. It either builds trust or breeds doubt. It either creates action or causes confusion. But there's something even more powerful waiting in the next chapter, a principle so fundamental that it determines whether your audience even bothers to process your message at all. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Grow to the Top and activate notifications to receive more self-improvement tips that will supercharge your growth. And make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you for your support. Chapter 2, Fluent Clarity. The email landed in my inbox at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Subject line, Strategic Initiative Update. The sender was a VP at a Fortune 500 company, someone whose opinion carried weight in boardrooms across 3 continents. I opened it expecting insights. Instead, I found this. We are currently in the process of implementing a comprehensive optimization framework designed to enhance operational efficiencies while simultaneously driving sustainable value creation through the strategic deployment of cross-functional synergies and best-in-class methodological approaches. 68 words, zero meaning. My brain did what every brain does when confronted with linguistic fog. It shut down. Not because the VP lacked intelligence or vision, but because understanding his message required more mental energy than I was willing to spend on a Tuesday afternoon email. That's the hidden cost of unclear communication. It's not just that people misunderstand you, it's that they stop trying to understand you at all. The cognitive load crisis. Here's what most leaders don't realize. Every word you choose either makes thinking easier or harder for your audience. There's no neutral ground. When you write, leverage synergistic opportunities, you're asking someone's brain to decode abstract concepts, parse complex relationships, and translate corporate speak into actionable meaning. That's cognitive work, hard work, the kind of work most people avoid when they can. But when you write, partner with 3 new clients, the brain processes it instantly. No translation required, no mental gymnastics, just clear, immediate understanding. This isn't about intelligence levels or attention spans. It's about how human cognition actually works. Our brains are prediction machines, constantly trying to anticipate what comes next. Simple, concrete language feeds that prediction engine efficiently. Complex, abstract language clogs it up. The result? Easy words feel true, hard words feel risky. This phenomenon has a name in psychology: processing fluency. When information flows smoothly through our mental circuits, we unconsciously interpret that ease as a signal of truth and safety. When information feels difficult to process, we interpret that difficulty as a warning sign. Your choice of words literally determines whether your ideas feel credible or suspicious, urgent or optional, actionable or theoretical. The trust equation hidden in plain sight. Warren Buffett figured this out decades ago. His annual letters to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders are masterclasses in fluent clarity, and they've built him a reputation as one of the most trusted voices in finance. Consider this excerpt from his 2019 letter. Charlie and I have endured similar cash-heavy positions from time to time in the past. These periods are never pleasant. They are also never permanent. Opportunities come and go. Money is patient. 43 words. 8th grade vocabulary, zero jargon. Yet this simple paragraph communicated a complex investment philosophy to millions of shareholders and influenced billions of dollars in market behavior. Buffett doesn't write this way because his audience lacks sophistication. Berkshire shareholders include some of the world's smartest investors, analysts, and business leaders. He writes this way because clarity creates trust, and trust creates action. Journalists quote Buffett constantly, not because he says shocking things, but because he says clear things. His phrases stick in memory and travel across conversations because they're built for human cognition, not corporate theater. The lesson is profound. When you make thinking easy for others, they reward you with attention, trust, and action. The 3 myths that keep you stuck. Before we dive into the mechanics of fluent clarity, let's destroy 3 myths that keep smart people trapped in communication quicksand. Myth 1. Big words impress. Reality, they distance and confuse. When you choose utilize over use or facilitate over help, you're not demonstrating intelligence, you're creating friction. Your audience spends mental energy decoding your vocabulary instead of engaging with your ideas. The most impressive thing you can do is make complex concepts feel simple. That requires skill, not syllables. Myth 2. More detail equals more value. Reality. Excess detail dilutes decisions. When you pack every supporting argument, qualifying clause, and background context into a single communication, you're not being thorough, you're being overwhelming. Your job isn't to share everything you know. It's to share exactly what your audience needs to make the decision you're requesting. Myth 3. Clarity is dumbing down. Reality. Clarity is precision. When you strip away unnecessary words and focus on core meaning, you're not reducing sophistication, you're increasing impact. The smartest people in any room appreciate clarity because they understand its power. Confusion is easy, clarity is hard. The one-sentence promise. The foundation of fluent clarity is the one-sentence promise. This is your entire message compressed into 18 words or less. Not a summary of your message, the message itself. Everything else is optional. Here's how it works. Before you write a single paragraph, before you create a single slide, before you schedule a single meeting, you write one sentence that captures your core ask or core value proposition. Approve a 2-week pilot to cut customer churn by 15%. 14 words, one clear request, one specific outcome, one measurable time frame. This sentence does 3 things simultaneously. First, it forces you to clarify your own thinking. If you can't compress your idea into one clear sentence, you don't understand it well enough to ask others to act on it. Second, it gives your audience an immediate framework for everything that follows. They know exactly what you're asking for and why it matters before you dive into supporting details. Third, it creates a decision point. Your audience can say yes, no, or ask for more information, but they can't claim confusion about what you want. The one-sentence promise isn't the beginning of your communication, it's the destination. Everything else exists to support this single, clear request. The architecture of understanding. Once you've crafted your one-sentence promise, you need to structure everything else to support it. This is where most communications fall apart. People front-load context, bury the main point in paragraph 3, and assume their audience will connect the dots. That's backwards. Human attention works like a spotlight, not a floodlight. It illuminates one thing at a time, in sequence. If you want someone to understand your message, you need to guide that spotlight deliberately. Start with the point. State your one-sentence promise first before any context or justification. This orients your audience's attention and gives them a framework for processing everything that follows. Then provide proof. Share the evidence that supports your request, but keep it concrete and specific. Instead of market research shows positive trends, say 3 competitors raised prices 20% with no customer loss. Finally, offer detail, but only if requested. Most decisions don't require exhaustive background. They require clear options and credible evidence. This sequence, point, proof, detail, mirrors how brains actually process persuasive information. Fight this sequence and you fight uphill. Follow it and momentum builds naturally. The concrete advantage. The difference between abstract and concrete language isn't just stylistic, it's neurological. Our brains evolved to process concrete information efficiently because concrete information helped our ancestors survive. When you say optimize the process, you're asking someone to imagine an abstract concept. When you say cut handoffs from 5 to 2, you're giving them a specific picture they can evaluate immediately. Concrete language activates more regions of the brain, creates stronger memories, and generates faster decisions. It's not just easier to understand, it's easier to remember and easier to act on. The transformation is straightforward but requires discipline. Every time you catch yourself using an abstraction, ask, what does this look like in the real world? Improve customer satisfaction becomes reduce support tickets from 40 to 20 per week. Enhance team productivity becomes ship features in 10 days instead of 21. Drive revenue growth becomes add 3 enterprise clients by December. This isn't about dumbing down your message, it's about making your message actionable. Abstract goals inspire, concrete goals get done. The because factor. There's one more element that transforms good clarity into great persuasion. The because factor. This is a single line that explains why your request matters for your audience's specific situation. Approve a 2-week pilot to cut customer churn by 15% because retention drives Q4 profitability. The because line does 2 things. First, it shows you've thought about relevance, not just results. You're not asking for action in a vacuum, you're connecting your request to their priorities. Second, it satisfies the brain's need for causation. Humans are wired to look for reasons. When you provide a clear because, you reduce the mental work required to say yes. The because doesn't need to be complex or comprehensive. It just needs to be true and relevant. One line that connects your ask to their world. The rhythm of clarity. Fluent clarity isn't just about word choice, it's about rhythm. Short sentences create momentum, long sentences create drag. The sweet spot is 12 to 16 words per sentence on average. This doesn't mean every sentence should be exactly 14 words. Variation creates interest. But when your average sentence length creeps above 20 words, comprehension starts to suffer. Pay attention to verbs. Strong verbs carry meaning efficiently. Weak verbs require supporting words that add length without adding clarity. Make a decision becomes decide. Conduct an analysis becomes analyze. Provide assistance becomes help. Watch for filler openers that add words without adding meaning. Just to clarify, basically what I'm saying is, I think maybe we should consider. These phrases train your audience to ignore your opening words because they rarely contain useful information. Every word should earn its place. If you can delete it without changing the meaning, delete it. The clarity dividend. When you master fluent clarity, 3 things happen predictably. First, your communications get shorter and generate fewer follow-up questions. People understand what you're asking the first time, so they can respond decisively instead of requesting clarification. Second, stakeholders start restating your points accurately without taking notes. This is the gold standard of clear communication, when your ideas transfer intact from your mind to theirs. Third, you become the person others seek out to simplify complex situations and set direction. Clarity becomes your professional brand, and that brand opens doors. But clarity can backfire if you're not careful. Too much directness can feel blunt or dismissive. The solution isn't to add complexity back, it's to add warmth. A simple, happy to share more detail if useful, preserves relationships while maintaining clarity. Sometimes you'll oversimplify and leave out essential context. The fix is an optional appendix. Longer version below for those who want the full picture. This gives detail-oriented stakeholders what they need without overwhelming everyone else. If ambiguity persists despite your best efforts, deploy the check-back question. What would make this a yes? This forces surface-level objections into the open where you can address them directly. The banned words list. The fastest way to build clarity habits is to identify your personal jargon and ban it. Most professionals have 5 to 10 words they overuse, words that feel sophisticated but create confusion. Common culprits include leverage, optimize, synergy, facilitate, utilize, implement, enhance, and strategic. These aren't inherently bad words, but they're often used as substitutes for clearer, more specific language. Build your personal banned words list. Every time you catch yourself using one of these words, stop and ask, what am I actually trying to say? Then say that instead. This exercise will feel awkward at first. You might worry that simpler language makes you sound less intelligent or less professional. That's the jargon addiction talking. Push through it. The goal isn't to eliminate all sophisticated vocabulary. It's to use sophisticated vocabulary only when it adds precision, not when it adds confusion. Your clarity challenge. Fluent clarity is a skill, not a talent. It improves with deliberate practice. Start with one high-stakes communication this week. Apply the one-sentence promise. Structure it as point-proof detail. Replace abstractions with concrete specifics. Add a because line. Then, watch what happens. Notice how people respond differently when your message flows smoothly through their mental circuits instead of creating friction and confusion. Clarity is the foundation of all persuasion. Without it, nothing else matters. With it, everything else becomes possible. But even the clearest message can fail if it's viewed through the wrong lens. The next chapter reveals how the first number you mention and the first comparison you draw can completely reshape how your audience evaluates your proposal, often before you've shared a single fact. Chapter 3, Frame Power. The email arrived at 9:23 a.m. with a subject line that made my stomach drop. Budget meeting, your project. I knew what was coming. 3 months of work, countless late nights, a solution that could save the company $240,000 annually, and now one meeting that would determine whether it lived or died. I had the facts. I had the data. I had a bulletproof business case. What I didn't realize was that none of that mattered as much as the first number someone would mention in that conference room. Because here's the thing about human decision-making that most people miss. We don't evaluate ideas in isolation. We evaluate them in comparison to something else. And whoever controls that comparison controls the decision. The meeting started predictably. The CFO opened with budget constraints. We're looking at cuts across all departments. Every project needs to justify a minimum 20% ROI to survive. 20%. That number hung in the air like a challenge. And in that moment, I realized I had a choice. I could let that anchor define the conversation, or I could set a different one. Before we dive into ROI calculations, I said, let me share what our competitors are spending on similar initiatives. Industry benchmark is $400,000 to $600,000 annually for this type of transformation. Suddenly, my $240,000 ask didn't feel expensive. It felt like a bargain. Same facts, same project, different frame, different outcome. The invisible architecture of choice. What happened in that meeting wasn't manipulation, it was choice architecture. Every decision exists within a frame, whether you design it consciously or let it form by accident. The frame determines how people evaluate options, assess risk, and ultimately choose what to do. Most leaders think facts sell themselves. They pile on data, stack up evidence, and assume rational arguments will carry the day. But facts don't exist in a vacuum. They exist within frames that give them meaning. Consider these two statements about the same situation. This initiative will save us $240,000 annually versus this initiative will stop us from losing $240,000 annually. Identical outcome, identical timeline, but the first frame emphasizes gain while the second emphasizes loss prevention. Which one feels more urgent? Which one feels more necessary? Which one gets approved faster? The answer depends on your audience's psychology and the context of the decision. But here's what's certain. The frame you choose will influence the outcome more than most of the facts you present. The anchor that drags everything. The most powerful framing tool is also the most subtle. Anchoring. This is the first number, comparison, or reference point that enters a conversation. Once it's established, everything else gets evaluated relative to that anchor. Steve Jobs understood this instinctively. When he introduced the iPhone in 2007, he didn't start by announcing the price. He started by establishing context. The most advanced smartphones today cost $999, he said, letting that number settle into the audience's minds. He showed slides of competing devices. He talked about their limitations. He built a case for why premium smartphones commanded premium prices. Then came the reveal. We're pricing iPhone at $499. The audience erupted. Same device he would have announced either way. Same features, same capabilities. But by anchoring expectations at $999 first, he made $499 feel like an incredible value instead of an expensive phone. The anchor didn't just influence perception, it influenced behavior. Pre-orders broke records, the launch exceeded every projection. A $499 phone became a cultural phenomenon, partly because it felt cheap compared to $999. This isn't trickery, it's psychology. Our brains use the first piece of comparative information as a baseline for all subsequent judgments. The anchor becomes the reference point that drags every other evaluation in its direction. The three lenses that shape reality. Beyond anchoring, there are three fundamental frame choices that determine how your audience processes your message. Each choice creates a different psychological context for decision-making. The first choice is gain versus loss. Do you emphasize what people will achieve or what they'll avoid losing? Both frames can describe the same outcome, but they trigger different emotional responses and different decision patterns. Research shows that people are loss-averse. We feel the pain of losing something more intensely than we feel the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. This means loss frames often create more urgency than gain frames, but they can also create more anxiety. The second choice is near versus far. Do you focus on immediate actions or long-term vision? Near frames use concrete language and specific details. Far frames use abstract language and big-picture concepts. When you're asking for a decision that needs to happen this week, use near framing. Sign the contract by Friday so we can start implementation Monday. When you're building support for a long-term strategy, use far framing. This positions us to dominate the market over the next decade. The third choice is now versus later. Do you emphasize immediate benefits or future rewards? Temporal framing affects how people discount value and assess urgency. This saves $20,000 this quarter hits differently than this saves $80,000 annually. Same total value, different time horizons, different psychological impact. The distance principle. Here's where framing gets sophisticated. The psychological distance between you and your audience should determine your language choices. When you're talking to people who are close to the decision, your direct team, immediate stakeholders, people who will implement the solution, use concrete, specific language. Talk about owners, dates, metrics, and processes. They need tactical clarity to move forward. When you're talking to people who are distant from the decision, senior executives, board members, external partners, use abstract strategic language. Talk about trajectories, opportunities, positioning, and outcomes. They need conceptual clarity to provide support. The mistake most people make is using the wrong distance level for their audience. They pitch concrete tactics to strategic thinkers or abstract visions to tactical implementers. The message doesn't land because the frame doesn't match the audience's perspective. The Buffett benchmark method. Warren Buffett has mastered the art of fair anchoring. In his annual letters, he doesn't just state Berkshire Hathaway's performance. He frames it against relevant benchmarks that help shareholders evaluate the results properly. Our gain in net worth during 2019 was $53.4 billion, which increased the per-share book value of both our Class A and Class B stock by 11%. Over the last 55 years, the compound annual gain in per-share book value has been 20.3%. During the same period, the S&P 500 gained 10.0% annually. Notice the architecture. First, he states the absolute number, $53.4 billion. Then he converts it to a per-share metric, 11%. Then he provides long-term context, 20.3% over 55 years. Finally, he anchors against the market benchmark, S&P 500 at 10.0%. Each frame serves a purpose. The absolute number shows scale. The per-share metric enables comparison across time. The long-term view demonstrates consistency. The market benchmark proves outperformance. Buffett doesn't just report results. He frames them in a way that makes the right conclusion feel obvious. That's the power of thoughtful anchoring. The gain-loss toggle. Sometimes, the same message needs to work for different audiences with different risk profiles. That's when you need to master the gain-loss toggle, the ability to frame the same outcome as either an opportunity or a threat. Consider a cybersecurity proposal. For a growth-oriented CEO who thinks in terms of opportunities, you might frame it as, this investment protects our ability to scale revenue by ensuring customer data security becomes a competitive advantage. For a risk-averse CFO who thinks in terms of threats, you might frame the same proposal as, this investment prevents the average $4.2 million cost of a data breach and protects us from regulatory fines that could reach $50 million. Same solution, same benefits, different frames that align with different psychological orientations. The key is understanding your audience's default mindset. Are they motivated more by achieving gains or avoiding losses? Are they focused on growth or protection? Are they thinking about opportunities or threats? Match your frame to their motivation, and your message will feel personally relevant instead of generically important. The temporal nudge. Time frames are frames too. The way you present deadlines, timelines, and schedules affects how people prioritize your request and assess its urgency. Weak temporal framing sounds like this. We should probably get started on this soon. Strong temporal framing sounds like this. The pilot needs to end by June 30th to free up Q3 budget for the full rollout. The difference isn't just specificity, it's causation. The strong version connects the deadline to a consequence that matters to the audience. It makes the timing feel necessary rather than arbitrary. You can also use temporal framing to create urgency without pressure. Instead of saying, "This offer expires Friday," say, "This pricing holds through Friday because our costs increase when the new vendor contract starts Monday." The deadline becomes a natural consequence of external factors rather than an artificial sales tactic. People respond better to logical constraints than arbitrary ultimatums. The comparison trap. Here's where framing can backfire. When you choose the wrong comparison or set an unfair anchor. If your benchmark feels cherry-picked or your frame feels manipulative, you'll trigger skepticism instead of agreement. The antidote is transparency. Show your math, explain your peer set, acknowledge the limitations of your comparison. When people understand how you arrived at your frame, they're more likely to accept it as legitimate. "I'm comparing us to companies with similar revenue and customer base" is more credible than "industry leaders spend twice what we're proposing." The first version invites evaluation. The second version invites suspicion. Fair framing accelerates decisions. Unfair framing destroys trust. The line between them is transparency about your methodology and honesty about your motivations. The frame-first habit. The most successful communicators don't leave framing to chance. They develop a frame-first habit, a systematic approach to choosing the lens before crafting the content. Before you write the email, before you build the presentation, before you schedule the meeting, you answer 3 questions. What's the anchor? What's the lens? What's the timeline? The anchor question forces you to identify the comparison that will shape value perception. Are you comparing to competitors, to the status quo, to the cost of inaction, or to alternative investments? The lens question forces you to choose between gain and loss, framing based on your audience's psychology and the decision context. Are they motivated by achieving something or avoiding something? The timeline question forces you to match your language to the psychological distance of the decision. Are you asking for immediate action or long-term commitment? Answer these questions first, and your content will have direction. Skip them, and your message will drift. The reframe recovery. Sometimes you'll realize mid-conversation that your frame isn't working. The audience seems confused, resistant, or disengaged. That's when you need reframe recovery, the ability to shift perspectives without losing credibility. The key is acknowledging the shift explicitly. "Let me try a different angle," or "here's another way to think about this," signals that you're adapting to their needs rather than abandoning your position. Then choose a frame that better matches their concerns or motivations. If the gain frame isn't resonating, try the loss frame. If the long-term vision feels too abstract, zoom in on immediate actions. If the comparison feels irrelevant, find a more appropriate benchmark. Flexibility in framing isn't weakness, it's skill. The best persuaders adjust their lens until they find the one that makes their message clear and compelling. Your frame advantage. When you master frame power, 3 things happen predictably. First, your pricing conversations become cleaner and less contentious. When you set fair anchors and provide relevant comparisons, haggling decreases and acceptance increases. Second, your decision cycles accelerate. When you match your framing to your audience's psychological distance and risk orientation, they can evaluate your proposal more efficiently and respond more decisively. Third, you become the default reference point in your category. When your frames become the standard way people think about problems and solutions in your domain, you gain lasting influence that extends far beyond individual conversations. But framing is just the beginning. Even the most perfectly framed message can fail if people don't believe your claims. The next chapter reveals how to transform vague promises into quotable evidence that makes skepticism impossible. Chapter 4. Precision Proof. The consultant's presentation was flawless: sleek slides, compelling graphics, a narrative that built to a crescendo of strategic insight. But when the CEO asked the obvious question, "What exactly will this cost and when will we see results?" everything fell apart. "Well, it depends on several factors," the consultant began. "We're looking at somewhere in the ballpark of 6 to 12 months for implementation, with ROI in the range of 15 to 30%, assuming market conditions remain favorable, and we can achieve reasonable adoption rates across the organization." The room went quiet. Not the good kind of quiet that signals deep consideration, but the bad kind that signals lost confidence. In 30 seconds, the consultant had transformed from trusted advisor to uncertain vendor. The CEO's response was swift and final: "Come back when you have real numbers." Here's what the consultant didn't understand. Vague claims don't just fail to persuade, they actively undermine credibility. When you speak in ranges and hedge with qualifiers, you signal that you don't really know what you're talking about. And if you don't know, why should anyone else believe? But there's something deeper happening here, something that goes beyond simple credibility. The human brain is wired to trust precision because precision suggests competence, preparation, and confidence. When someone says, "We'll increase conversion by approximately 20 to 25%, your subconscious hears uncertainty. When someone says, "We'll increase conversion from 2.3% to 3.1% by December 15th, your subconscious hears expertise. The gravity of exactness. There's a reason Warren Buffett's annual letters command global attention while most corporate communications disappear into the noise. It's not just his investment performance, it's his precision. Consider this excerpt from his 2020 letter. At year-end, Berkshire held $138 billion in cash and cash equivalents. We also have $19.8 billion in Treasury bills and other U.S. government securities. Our total cash and equivalents therefore totaled $158.1 billion. 3 specific numbers: no hedging, no approximations, no roughly or approximately, just exact figures that investors can quote, verify, and trust. But Buffett doesn't stop at numbers. He extends precision to his investment criteria. We need earnings of at least $75 million pre-tax, demonstrated consistent earning power, good returns on equity while employing little or no debt, management in place, simple businesses, and an offering price. Notice the specificity. Not substantial earnings, but $75 million pre-tax. Not strong returns, but good returns on equity. Not reasonable debt levels, but little or no debt. Every criterion is clear enough to evaluate objectively. This precision serves multiple purposes. First, it demonstrates that Buffett has thought deeply about his standards rather than making them up on the spot. Second, it allows potential sellers to self-qualify before approaching Berkshire. Third, it creates accountability. Buffett can't later claim he meant something different. Most importantly, it makes his standards quotable. Investment bankers around the world know Buffett's criteria by heart because they're specific enough to remember and repeat accurately. The because effect. But precision alone isn't enough. Even the most exact claim can feel arbitrary without context. That's where the because effect comes into play, one of the most powerful yet underutilized tools in persuasive communication. The psychology is straightforward. Humans are reason-seeking creatures. We want to understand not just what someone is asking us to do, but why they're asking us to do it. When you provide a clear reason, even a simple one, compliance increases dramatically. The classic study involved people trying to cut in line at a copy machine. When they simply asked, "Excuse me, may I use the copy machine?" about 60% of people let them cut in line. When they added a reason, "Excuse me, may I use the copy machine because I'm in a rush?" compliance jumped to 94%. But here's the surprising part. Even weak reasons work. When researchers tried, "Excuse me, may I use the copy machine because I have to make copies?" compliance was still 93%. The reason was essentially meaningless. Of course, someone at a copy machine needs to make copies, but it satisfied the brain's need for causation. This doesn't mean you should use meaningless reasons. It means you should never make a request without providing some rationale, no matter how obvious it might seem to you. Cut customer churn to 7.5% by Q3 becomes cut customer churn to 7.5% by Q3 because retention directly funds our roadmap expansion. The because clause transforms a metric into a mission. The identity advantage. There's another layer to precision that most people miss entirely: identity alignment. When you connect your request to someone's self-concept, you tap into one of the most powerful drivers of human behavior: the need to act consistently with who we believe we are. This isn't about flattery or manipulation. It's about recognizing the professional identities people have already chosen and aligning your requests with those identities. We're a data-driven team. Let's publish this metric weekly works because it connects a specific action to an existing identity. People who see themselves as data-driven will naturally want to behave in data-driven ways. You're the kind of leader who follows through on commitments, works because it reinforces a positive identity while setting an expectation for future behavior. The key is authenticity. The identity labels you use must be truthful and earned. If someone hasn't demonstrated data-driven behavior, calling them data-driven will backfire. If someone has a track record of missing deadlines, praising their follow-through will feel sarcastic. But when the label fits, it becomes a powerful motivator. People will work harder to maintain an identity they value than to achieve an outcome they want. The question-behavior bridge. Here's where precision gets sophisticated. The question-behavior effect. When you ask someone if they plan to take a specific action, you increase the likelihood that they'll actually take that action. The mechanism is subtle but powerful. The question forces people to imagine themselves performing the behavior, which makes the behavior feel more familiar and achievable. It also creates a small social commitment. They've stated their intention, even if only hypothetically. Will you try this script on your next sales call is more effective than you should try this script on your next sales call. The question format invites engagement rather than resistance. But the question must be specific enough to visualize. Will you implement this strategy is too vague. Will you send this email template to 3 prospects this week? Creates a clear mental picture of the desired action. The follow-up matters too. How will you track the results, or when should we check in on progress, reinforces the commitment and establishes accountability. The SEA method. The most reliable way to build precision into your communications is through the SEA method: state, explain, ask. State the exact figure or specific outcome you're proposing. Use real numbers with appropriate precision. Increase qualified leads by 47% within 90 days instead of significantly improve lead generation soon. Explain with a one-line because clause that connects your request to something your audience cares about. Because qualified leads directly correlate with Q4 revenue targets, or because our current conversion rate limits growth potential. Ask for a specific micro-commitment that moves the conversation forward. Can we approve a 2-week pilot starting Monday? Or will you review the proposal by Friday so we can start implementation next week? This sequence works because it mirrors how the brain processes decisions. First, we need to understand what's being proposed, state. Then, we need to understand why it matters, explain. Finally, we need a clear path to action, ask. Skip any step and the decision stalls. Include all 3, and momentum builds naturally. The vagueness audit. Most professionals underestimate how much vagueness creeps into their communication. Words like soon, better, fast, significant, and substantial feel precise when you're writing them, but they create confusion when others read them. The solution is a systematic vagueness audit. Every time you catch yourself using a fuzzy word, ask, what does this actually mean in measurable terms? Soon becomes a specific date. Better becomes a quantified improvement. Fast becomes a duration. Significant becomes a percentage or dollar amount. This isn't about over-engineering every statement. It's about replacing accidental vagueness with intentional precision where it matters most, in your core claims, key deadlines, and critical commitments. Scope boundaries matter too. When you say improve customer satisfaction, do you mean all customers or just enterprise accounts? All satisfaction metrics or just net promoter score? All improvement or improvement above a specific threshold? Clear scope prevents misunderstandings and enables accurate measurement. Increase enterprise NPS from 42 to 55 by year-end leaves no room for interpretation. The quotability test. Here's how you know your precision is working. Other people start quoting your numbers verbatim in conversations you're not part of. When stakeholders say, Sarah mentioned we need to hit 75% churn by Q3, instead of, Sarah mentioned we need to improve retention, you've achieved quotable precision. Your specific claims have become the shared language for discussing the topic. This quotability serves multiple purposes. It ensures your message travels accurately across the organization. It reinforces your reputation for clear thinking. It makes your standards the default reference point for future decisions. The best leaders pre-write 2 or 3 proof phrases that stakeholders can quote verbatim. These become the sound bites that define how others talk about your initiative, your standards, or your results. No unknown tasks by Friday is more quotable than improve accountability. Ship features in 10 days, not 21, is more quotable than accelerate development cycles. The precision paradox. There's a counterintuitive aspect to precision that trips up many communicators. Sometimes being too precise undermines credibility rather than building it. When you claim, we'll increase revenue by exactly 23.7% in 147 days, you sound like you're making up numbers rather than reporting real data. The precision feels artificial because real-world outcomes rarely align to decimal points. The solution is contextual precision. Use the level of precision that matches your data quality and your audience's needs. If you're working with estimates, round to reasonable increments. If you're working with measured results, use the precision your measurement tools provide. Will increase revenue by 24% within 5 months feels more credible than the decimal-heavy version while still providing specific targets for planning and accountability. The key is consistency. If you cite 24% in one context, don't round it to 25% in another context unless you explain the difference. Inconsistent precision suggests careless thinking or selective reporting. The identity backfire. Identity-aligned language can backfire if you misread the room or overstate the case. Calling someone data-driven when they've never shown interest in metrics will feel like sarcasm. Praising someone's attention to detail right after they've made an obvious error will feel like mockery. The recovery is straightforward. Withdraw the label, earn it through observation, then reissue it later when it's genuinely deserved. I jumped the gun calling us data-driven. Let's earn that label by tracking these 3 metrics consistently for a month, acknowledges the mistake while creating a path forward. Sometimes the identity exists, but the label feels forced. You're obviously someone who values precision sounds awkward, even when it's true. Given your background in engineering, you'll appreciate the precision of this approach feels more natural because it connects the identity to relevant context. The weak reason trap. Not all because clauses are created equal. Because it's better or because it's important provide the form of reasoning without the substance. They satisfy the brain's need for causation, but don't provide meaningful justification. Strong reasons connect to outcomes your audience cares about. Because retention directly impacts Q4 profitability, links the request to financial results. Because consistency reduces onboarding time for new team members, connects the standard to operational efficiency. The upgrade path is simple. Replace benefit-based reasons with outcome-based reasons. Instead of because it's more efficient, say because it cuts processing time from 4 hours to 90 minutes. Instead of because it's more reliable, say because it reduces system downtime from 3% to 0.5%. Your precision practice. Precision is a skill that improves with deliberate practice. Start with one high-stakes communication this week. Apply the SEA method. Replace vague terms with specific metrics. Add authentic identity alignment where appropriate. Include a micro-commitment question. Then, track what happens. Notice how people respond differently when your claims are specific rather than general. Watch how exact numbers travel through conversations while vague promises disappear. Precision isn't about perfection, it's about clarity. It's about making your ideas so specific that others can evaluate them, remember them, and act on them confidently. But even the most precise message can fail if it doesn't stick in memory long enough to influence decisions. The next chapter reveals the hidden psychology of attention and repetition, and why the words you say first might matter less than the words you say last. Chapter 5, Prime and Repeat. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. By 1:58, I was watching 15 executives file into the boardroom, each carrying their own agenda, their own priorities, their own mental noise from the morning's meetings. I had 20 minutes to convince them to approve a $2.3 million investment in a new customer platform. 20 minutes to cut through the clutter of quarterly reviews, budget pressures, and competing initiatives. 20 minutes to make my idea the one they'd remember when decision time came. But here's what I'd learned from watching hundreds of failed pitches. The battle for attention isn't won during your presentation. It's won in the first 30 seconds, before you've shared a single slide or cited a single statistic. Because attention is the gatekeeper to persuasion. If you don't capture it cleanly and direct it purposefully, nothing else matters. Your brilliant insights will bounce off distracted minds. Your compelling evidence will disappear into the noise. Your urgent requests will join the pile of things to think about later. So I started with a question that cuts straight to their biggest pain point. What would you do with 30% faster customer onboarding? The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for you to get to the point, but the focused quiet of people suddenly thinking about a problem they cared about. I had their attention. Now I needed to keep it. The attention economy. We live in an attention economy where focus has become the scarcest resource. Your audience isn't just evaluating your message, they're deciding whether your message deserves their mental bandwidth at all. This creates a fundamental challenge for anyone trying to persuade. You're not just competing with other ideas in the room, you're competing with every email notification, every urgent deadline, every personal worry that's pulling at your audience's consciousness. Most presenters ignore this reality. They dive straight into content, assuming attention will follow. They pile on facts and figures, hoping something will stick. They save their most important points for the end, not realizing that attention peaks early and fades fast. But there's a better way, a way that acknowledges how attention actually works and designs messages that work with human psychology instead of against it. The secret lies in understanding two fundamental principles, priming and repetition. Priming determines what gets processed. Repetition determines what gets remembered. Master both, and your ideas don't just get heard, they get internalized and repeated by others. The pre-hook strategy. Before you can persuade, you need to prime. Priming is the process of orienting someone's attention toward a specific concept or frame before you present your main content. It's like clearing a mental pathway for your message to travel. The most effective priming tool is the pre-hook, a single question or contrast that focuses attention on the problem you're about to solve. The pre-hook doesn't contain your solution. It doesn't reveal your strategy. It simply creates curiosity about the outcome you're promising. What would you do with 30% faster customer onboarding? Primes the audience to think about speed, efficiency, and customer experience before I've mentioned my platform or my proposal. Their brains start generating answers, which makes them more receptive to the solution I'm about to present. Same budget, twice the throughput. This contrast primes attention on efficiency and resource optimization. It creates a puzzle that the audience wants to solve, which makes them lean in rather than tune out. The key is specificity. Vague questions like, "What if we could do better?" don't create focused attention. They create confusion. Specific questions like, "What if we could cut support tickets from 40 to 15 per week?" give the brain something concrete to process. The pre-hook serves another crucial function. It separates your message from everything that came before. It creates a clean break from the previous topic and signals that something new and important is about to begin. The Obama effect. Barack Obama understood the power of priming better than perhaps any political communicator of his generation. His signature phrase, "Yes, we can," wasn't just a slogan. It was a priming device that oriented listeners toward possibility before policy details arrived. Notice the structure. "Yes, we can" doesn't specify what we can do. It doesn't outline how we will do it. It simply primes the audience to think in terms of collective capability and positive outcomes. Once that frame is established, specific proposals feel like natural extensions of an already accepted premise. Obama used this phrase strategically throughout his speeches, not randomly, not constantly, but at key moments when he needed to refocus attention and reinforce the possibility frame. Open, midpoint, close. 3 strategic placements that created a rhythmic spine for his entire message. The phrase worked because it combined priming with repetition. Each repetition reinforced the possibility frame while creating a memorable anchor that audiences could quote and share. "Yes, we can" became shorthand for Obama's entire political philosophy, repeated by millions of supporters across thousands of conversations. This wasn't accidental. It was the result of understanding how attention and memory work together to create lasting influence. The sticky spine technique. Repetition is one of the most powerful tools in persuasion, but it's also one of the most misused. Most people think repetition means saying the same thing over and over until it sticks. That's not repetition. That's annoying. Effective repetition requires what I call a sticky spine, a short, rhythmic phrase that captures your core message and gets repeated at strategic intervals throughout your communication. The sticky spine has 3 characteristics. First, it's concrete rather than abstract. Cut, build, measure is more memorable than optimize, implement, evaluate. Concrete words create mental pictures that stick in memory. Second, it follows a rhythmic pattern. 3 beats work best because they create a sense of completeness without overwhelming working memory. Plan, execute, deliver. Fast, cheap, reliable. Think, decide, act. Third, it uses parallel structure. Same grammatical form for each element. All verbs are all nouns. This parallelism reduces cognitive load and makes the phrase easier to process and remember. The placement matters as much as the content. Open, midpoint, close. 3 strategic repetitions that reinforce your message without overwhelming your audience. More than 3 repetitions and you risk sounding robotic. Fewer than 3 and you miss the memory advantage. Between repetitions, you provide evidence, tell stories, and build your case. But you always return to the spine. It becomes the thread that holds your entire message together and the phrase that travels beyond the room. The rhythm of persuasion. There's something almost musical about effective communication. The best speakers and writers understand that language has rhythm, and rhythm affects how messages are received and remembered. Parallelism is the foundation of persuasive rhythm. When you structure phrases using the same grammatical pattern, you create a cadence that feels natural and memorable. "We will plan carefully, execute quickly, and measure constantly" flows better than "We will plan carefully, execute with speed, and measure on a regular basis." The parallel structure does more than create rhythm. It creates expectation. Once the brain recognizes the pattern, it anticipates the completion. This anticipation increases attention and makes the final element more impactful. Alliteration can add another layer of memorability, but it must be used sparingly. Fast, flexible, focused works because the repetition of the F sound creates a subtle musical quality. But overuse alliteration and you sound like you're writing advertising copy rather than making a serious business case. The goal isn't to turn your communication into poetry. It's to use the natural musicality of language to make your message more engaging and memorable. When rhythm supports meaning rather than replacing it, both attention and retention increase. The evidence echo. Here's where most people get repetition wrong. They repeat their conclusion without repeating their evidence. They say, this will increase revenue 3 times, but never circle back to the proof that supports that claim. Effective repetition links spine to substance. Each time you repeat your core message, you pair it with a different piece of supporting evidence. This creates what I call the evidence echo, a pattern where proof and promise reinforce each other. First repetition, cut, build, measure. That's how we reduce time to market from 6 months to 10 weeks. Second repetition, cut, build, measure. The same approach that helped our pilot team ship 3 features ahead of schedule. Third repetition, cut, build, measure. The framework that turns good intentions into measurable results. Same spine, different evidence. The repetition reinforces the message, while the varying evidence prevents monotony and builds a comprehensive case. This approach satisfies 2 different cognitive needs. The repetition satisfies our need for pattern and predictability. The varying evidence satisfies our need for proof and justification. Together, they create a message that feels both familiar and substantive. The priming mismatch problem. Not every pre-hook works with every audience. Sometimes you'll ask a focusing question and get blank stares instead of engaged attention. Sometimes your contrast will feel irrelevant to the room's priorities. Sometimes your priming will miss the mark entirely. The solution is testing and adaptation. Before your high-stakes presentation, test your pre-hook with a colleague or trusted advisor. Ask them to repeat back what they heard and what questions it raised for them. If they can't engage with your pre-hook, your real audience probably won't either. When priming fails mid-presentation, pivot quickly. Let me try a different angle, or here's another way to think about this, signals that you're adapting to their needs rather than stubbornly sticking to your script. The best pre-hooks earn concrete follow-up questions. If your opening generates specific, relevant questions about your topic, you've successfully focused attention. If it generates confusion or silence, you need a different approach. The repetition trap. Repetition can backfire if it feels forced or excessive. When your audience starts rolling their eyes at your repeated phrase, you've crossed the line from memorable to annoying. The warning signs are obvious. People checking their phones during your repetitions, visible sighs when you return to your spine, or direct feedback that you're being repetitive. When this happens, dial back immediately. Reduce to open and close placement only. Drop the midpoint repetition and let your evidence carry the middle section. This preserves the memory benefit while eliminating the annoyance factor. Sometimes the spine itself is the problem. If your phrase feels too cute, too forced, or too removed from the serious business at hand, abandon it entirely. Better to have no spine than a spine that undermines your credibility. The goal is always to serve your message, not to show off your linguistic cleverness. When technique becomes more noticeable than content, technique needs to change. The corporate mantra effect. When repetition works perfectly, something magical happens. Your phrase becomes organizational shorthand. People start using your spine to discuss the topic even when you're not in the room. Cut, build, measure becomes how the team talks about project management. Fast, cheap, reliable becomes how they evaluate vendor proposals. Think, decide, act becomes their decision-making framework. This is the ultimate test of effective repetition. When your language becomes their language, you've achieved influence that extends far beyond individual conversations. Your ideas spread through the organization, carried by the very words you chose to express them. But this level of adoption requires authenticity. The spine must genuinely capture something important about your message. It must feel natural rather than manufactured. It must serve the audience's needs rather than just your communication goals. When all these elements align, relevant priming, authentic spine, strategic repetition, your message doesn't just get heard, it gets internalized, repeated, and acted upon by others. Your priming practice. Start with your next important presentation or email. Craft a pre-hook that focuses attention on the outcome you're promising. Develop a 3-beat spine that captures your core message. Plan your repetition strategy. Open, midpoint, close. Then pay attention to what happens. Notice how people respond when you prime their attention versus when you dive straight into content. Watch how memorable phrases travel through subsequent conversations while unmemorable content disappears. Priming and repetition aren't tricks, they're tools that work with human psychology to make important messages stick. When you understand how attention and memory actually function, you can design communications that cut through noise and create lasting influence. But even the most memorable message can fail if it fights against the social forces that drive human behavior. The next chapter reveals how to harness the invisible currents of peer influence and group psychology, forces so powerful they can make the difference between resistance and enthusiasm. Chapter 6: Social Levers. The startup founder had everything going for him. Brilliant product, solid team, clear market opportunity. But when he pitched his Series A to 12 different VCs, he got 12 polite rejections. "We love the vision," they'd say. "The technology is impressive, the team is strong, but we're going to pass." Frustrated, he called me for advice. "What am I missing?" he asked. "The numbers are there, the product works. Why won't anyone invest?" I asked him to walk me through his pitch. He started with the problem, moved to the solution, showed the market size, demonstrated the product, and finished with financial projections. Everything a rational investor should want to hear. But buried in his presentation was a single slide that revealed the real issue. Under customer traction, he listed 3 pilot customers, all small companies, all recent signups, all still in trial phases. "Who else is using this?" I asked. "Well, we're still building our customer base," he said, "but the early feedback is really positive." There it was, the invisible barrier that was killing every pitch. He was asking investors to be the first to believe in his company when he hadn't proven that anyone else believed in it yet. 3 months later, he pitched again. Same product, same team, same market opportunity. But this time, his customer slide told a different story. 12 companies now using our platform in production. Average deployment time, 3 weeks. Average ROI, 340% in first 6 months. 3 enterprise clients signed long-term contracts. He raised $4.2 million in his first round of meetings. The herd instinct in high stakes. What changed wasn't the quality of his company, it was the social proof. Investors, like all humans, use shortcuts when making decisions under uncertainty. And one of the most powerful shortcuts is following the behavior of relevant peers. This isn't weakness or irrationality, it's efficiency. When stakes are high and information is incomplete, looking at what similar people have done in similar situations provides valuable data about likely outcomes. But here's what most people miss. Social influence isn't just about showing that others have made the same choice. It's about showing that the right others have made the same choice for the right reasons with the right results. The founder's first pitch showed that some companies were trying his product. His second pitch showed that relevant companies were succeeding with his product. Same social proof category, completely different persuasive power. This distinction matters because not all social proof is created equal. The wrong peer group can actually hurt your case. The right peer group can make your case feel inevitable. The peer relevance filter. When someone evaluates social proof, their brain automatically asks 3 questions. Are these people like me? Did they face a similar situation? Did they get results I want? If the answer to any of these questions is no, the social proof loses its power. If the answer to all 3 is yes, the social proof becomes almost irresistible. This is why Fortune 500 companies use our platform often fails to persuade mid-market buyers. The peer group feels too distant, too different, too irrelevant to their specific situation. They assume Fortune 500 companies have resources, needs, and constraints that don't apply to their world. But 3 SaaS companies at your revenue level cut customer acquisition cost by 40% using our approach hits differently. Same size, same industry, same challenge, same desired outcome. The relevance is obvious, and the implication is clear. The key is specificity in peer selection. Instead of casting the widest possible net, narrow your focus to the most relevant subset. Instead of impressive names, choose similar situations. Instead of big numbers, choose believable parallels. This requires knowing your audience well enough to identify their true peer group. Who do they compare themselves to? Who do they compete with? Who do they respect? Who do they aspire to become? The Tesla transparency model. Elon Musk has mastered the art of transparent scarcity, creating urgency through honest constraints rather than artificial pressure. When Tesla launched the Model 3, Musk didn't just announce limited availability. He explained exactly why availability was limited and provided real-time evidence of the constraint. Production is the hard part, he said repeatedly. He showed factory footage. He shared production numbers weekly. He explained the manufacturing challenges in detail. He made the waitlist public so people could see their position in line. This transparency served multiple purposes. First, it made the scarcity feel real rather than manufactured. Second, it turned waiting into a shared experience rather than individual frustration. Third, it created a community identity around being early adopters of sustainable transportation. The waitlist itself became social proof. Seeing 400,000 people ahead of you in line didn't discourage orders, it encouraged them. It proved that smart, forward-thinking people believed in the product enough to wait years for delivery. Musk also embedded identity into the mission. Accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy wasn't just a company tagline, it was a movement people could join. Buying a Tesla became a way to signal environmental consciousness and technological sophistication simultaneously. This combination of transparent constraints and identity alignment created a self-reinforcing cycle. The more people joined the waitlist, the more desirable the product became. The more desirable the product became, the more people wanted to join the community of owners. The reciprocity starter. Most people approach reciprocity backwards. They ask for something first, then offer value in return. But the most powerful reciprocity starts with giving, not getting. Here's the template we use for customer onboarding. Feel free to adapt it for your team. If it helps, we can discuss how to customize it for your specific workflow. This approach works because it removes the pressure of immediate commitment while demonstrating value up front. The recipient gets something useful regardless of whether they engage further. But the act of receiving creates a psychological debt that many people feel compelled to repay. The key is making the initial gift genuinely valuable and immediately usable. A template they can implement today, a framework they can apply to their current challenge, a tool that solves a real problem without requiring your ongoing involvement. This isn't manipulation, it's demonstration. You're showing, rather than telling, what kind of value you provide. You're proving your competence through action rather than claiming it through words. The follow-up matters too. If it helps, creates optionality rather than obligation. We can suggest collaboration rather than sales. The language preserves their autonomy while creating a natural next step. The micro-commitment bridge. Large commitments feel risky. Small commitments feel manageable. But here's the psychology that most people miss. Small commitments predict large commitments. People who say yes to tiny requests become more likely to say yes to bigger requests later. This isn't about manipulation, it's about momentum. Each small yes builds confidence in the relationship and reduces the perceived risk of the next yes. Each small commitment creates a track record of positive interaction that makes larger commitments feel safer. The key is making the micro-commitment genuinely micro. Reply yes, and I'll send a 2-minute demo requires almost no effort or risk. Schedule a 15-minute call to discuss your needs feels much bigger even though the time difference is small. The micro-commitment should also provide immediate value. The 2-minute demo should actually be useful. The follow-up information should actually be relevant. Each interaction should leave them better off than before, regardless of whether they take the next step. This creates a positive feedback loop. Small commitment leads to small value delivery, which builds trust for slightly larger commitment, which leads to slightly larger value delivery, and so on. The relationship deepens gradually rather than requiring a big leap of faith. The identity invitation. People don't just buy products or services, they buy identities. They choose options that align with how they see themselves or how they want to be seen by others. We work with data-driven leaders who value precision over politics. Isn't just describing your customer base. It's inviting people to join a specific identity group. People who see themselves as data-driven and precision-focused will feel drawn to that community. The identity language must be authentic and earned. You can't just claim that innovative leaders choose your solution. You need to demonstrate it through specific examples and concrete evidence. But when the identity alignment is genuine, it becomes a powerful motivator. This works because identity is social. We define ourselves partly through the groups we belong to and the choices we make. When choosing your solution becomes a way to signal membership in a desirable identity group, the decision becomes about more than functional benefits. The language should feel aspirational but achievable. Visionary CEOs might feel too lofty for most people to identify with. Growth-focused leaders feels more accessible while still being flattering. The constraint verification system. Artificial scarcity backfires because people can sense when constraints are manufactured rather than real. But genuine constraints, properly communicated, create focus and urgency without triggering skepticism. Only 8 seats available due to live coaching format works because the constraint is logical and verifiable. The limitation exists for a legitimate reason, quality of interaction, and people can verify it by checking the format description. Limited time offer expires Friday feels arbitrary unless you explain why. Pricing holds through Friday because our vendor contracts reset Monday with higher costs provides a logical reason for the deadline. The verification matters as much as the explanation, publishing a waitlist with timestamps, showing calendar availability in real time, explaining the operational constraints that create the limitation. Transparency builds trust, while scarcity creates urgency. When constraints feel fair and logical, they help rather than hurt the decision process. They provide a framework for evaluation and a reason to act promptly without feeling pressured or manipulated. The social proof hierarchy. Not all social proof carries equal weight. Understanding the hierarchy helps you choose the most persuasive evidence for your specific situation. Peer proof sits at the top. People like your audience who faced similar challenges and achieved relevant results. This works because the similarity makes the outcome feel achievable, and the relevance makes it feel desirable. Expert proof comes next, recognized authorities in the field who endorse your approach. This works when your audience respects expertise and wants to align with best practices. Popularity proof ranks third, large numbers of people who have made the same choice. This works when your audience values mainstream acceptance and wants to avoid outlier risk. The mistake most people make is leading with popularity proof when peer proof is available. Thousands of companies use our platform is less persuasive than 3 companies in your industry reduced costs by 25% using our approach. Match the proof type to your audience's psychology and decision context. Risk-averse buyers respond to peer proof. Innovation-focused buyers respond to expert proof. Cost-conscious buyers respond to popularity proof. The commitment escalation path. The goal isn't to get one big yes, it's to create a series of small yeses that build toward larger commitments. Each step should feel natural and logical given the previous step. Start with information sharing. Would a case study from a similar company be helpful? This requires minimal commitment but begins the engagement process. Move to trial participation. Want to try the tool on one project to see how it works? This involves more commitment but provides direct experience with value. Progress to pilot programs. Ready to run a formal pilot with your team? This requires significant commitment but offers measurable results. Finish with full implementation. Based on the pilot results, shall we discuss rolling this out company-wide? This feels logical given the proven success in the pilot. Each step builds evidence for the next step while reducing the perceived risk. The commitment escalation feels natural rather than forced because each level is justified by the results of the previous level. Your social leverage practice. Start by auditing your current social proof. Is it relevant to your audience's peer group? Does it address their specific situation? Does it demonstrate outcomes they want? Then, examine your reciprocity approach. Are you giving value before asking for commitment? Is your initial gift genuinely useful and immediately applicable? Finally, map your commitment escalation path. What's the smallest possible first step? How does each step build evidence for the next? Where might people get stuck, and how can you reduce friction at those points? Social levers aren't about manipulation, they're about alignment. When your approach aligns with how people naturally make decisions under uncertainty, resistance decreases and momentum builds. But even the most socially aligned message can fail if it triggers the wrong psychological response. The next chapter reveals the delicate balance between authority and autonomy and why the way you ask for something might matter more than what you're asking for. Chapter 7, Power Politeness. The email arrived at 8:47 a.m. with a subject line that made my stomach tighten. Urgent, need your decision by EOD. I opened it to find 3 paragraphs of demands disguised as requests. You need to approve the budget increase immediately. We have to move forward with the vendor selection today. There's no other option but to sign the contract this afternoon. By the 3rd sentence, I was already crafting my no response. Not because the requests were unreasonable, they might have been perfectly valid, but because the tone triggered something primal in my brain. The resistance that kicks in when someone tries to control me. The sender had fallen into the most common trap in business communication, confusing authority with force. They thought that urgent language and absolute statements would compel action. Instead, they created the opposite effect, a psychological wall that made cooperation feel like surrender. 3 hours later, I received a different email about the same project from a different team member. Would you be open to reviewing the budget proposal? If it makes sense, I'd recommend moving forward this week because the vendor pricing expires Friday. If not, no worries, we'll find another path. Same request, same timeline, completely different response from my brain. The second email made me want to help. The first made me want to resist. The difference wasn't just politeness, it was power politeness. The ability to be clear and decisive while preserving the other person's sense of choice and dignity. The reactance trigger. There's a psychological phenomenon called reactance that explains why force often backfires in persuasion. When people feel their freedom to choose is being threatened, they instinctively push back, even when the proposed action might benefit them. This isn't stubbornness or irrationality. It's a hardwired response that protects our autonomy and self-determination. The moment someone feels controlled or cornered, their brain shifts from evaluation mode to resistance mode. They stop asking, "Is this a good idea?" and start asking, "How do I maintain my independence?" The trigger words are obvious once you know what to listen for. You need to, you have to, you must. There's no choice. The only option is. Each phrase sends a signal that the speaker is trying to eliminate alternatives and force compliance. But reactance isn't just triggered by overtly controlling language. It can also be triggered by excessive pressure, artificial urgency, or any communication that makes the recipient feel manipulated rather than respected. The challenge for leaders is that they often need to be directive and decisive. They can't hedge every request or turn every decision into a committee discussion. But they also can't afford to trigger resistance in the people they need to influence. The solution is calibrated power, language that combines clear intent with preserved autonomy. The Nadella transformation. When Satya Nadella became CEO of Microsoft in 2014, he inherited a culture known for aggressive internal competition and top-down decision-making. The company was successful, but struggling with innovation and collaboration. Nadella could have used his authority to mandate cultural change. He could have issued directives about new behaviors and threatened consequences for non-compliance. Instead, he chose a different approach that demonstrated power politeness at scale. His signature framework, model, coach, care, exemplified calibrated power. Model meant demonstrating the behaviors he wanted to see rather than just demanding them. Coach meant helping people develop new capabilities rather than just telling them what to do. Care meant considering the human impact of decisions rather than just the business outcomes. Notice the language choices. Not you will model these behaviors, but we will model these behaviors. Not you must change, but let's learn together. Not this is how it's going to be, but this is how we can grow. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was profound. Microsoft's market value increased from $300 billion to over $2 trillion during Nadella's tenure. Employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. Innovation accelerated across every division. The cultural shift happened not because Nadella forced it, but because he made it feel like a choice people wanted to make. He preserved autonomy while providing clear direction. He demonstrated authority through service rather than dominance. The ask-offer-ask architecture. The most effective structure for power politeness is what I call ask-offer-ask. This three-part framework invites engagement, demonstrates value, and creates a clear path forward, all while preserving the recipient's sense of choice. The first ask is an invitation rather than a demand. Would you be open to exploring a different approach to customer onboarding? This creates curiosity without pressure. It signals that you have something valuable to share while making it clear that engagement is optional. The offer provides immediate value regardless of whether they choose to proceed. I can share the framework we use to cut onboarding time from 6 weeks to 10 days. It's a simple, 3-step process you could adapt for your team. This demonstrates competence while giving them something useful even if they decline further engagement. The second ask creates a specific next step while maintaining optionality. If it seems relevant to your situation, would you like to discuss how to customize it for your workflow? This makes it easy to say yes while making it equally easy to say no. The entire sequence feels collaborative rather than coercive. You're offering to help solve a problem rather than pushing a predetermined solution. You're inviting participation rather than demanding compliance. The recommendation revolution. One of the most powerful shifts in power politeness is moving from hedge language to recommendation language. Most people think they need to soften their suggestions to avoid seeming pushy, but weak language often creates more problems than strong language. I think maybe we should consider possibly trying a different approach. Sounds tentative and uncertain. It makes the speaker seem unsure of their own advice. It forces the recipient to not only evaluate the suggestion, but also assess the speaker's confidence level. I recommend we try a different approach. Sounds confident and clear. It signals that the speaker has thought carefully about the situation and reached a considered conclusion. It makes evaluation easier because the recommendation is stated clearly. The key is pairing recommendation language with autonomy preservation. I recommend we try a different approach. What's your take on that? The first part demonstrates confidence. The second part invites input and preserves choice. This combination works because it satisfies two different psychological needs. People want to work with confident, decisive leaders who have clear opinions, but they also want to feel that their own judgment and autonomy are respected. The opt-out advantage. Counterintuitively, one of the most powerful tools in power politeness is making it explicitly easy to say no. When you remove the pressure to comply, you often increase the likelihood of compliance. If this doesn't feel like the right fit, just say so. No hard feelings accomplishes several things simultaneously. It reduces the social pressure that might trigger reactance. It demonstrates confidence in your proposal by showing you're not afraid of rejection. It makes the recipient feel safer about engaging because they know they can exit cleanly. This approach works because it shifts the dynamic from persuasion to evaluation. Instead of feeling like they need to resist your sales effort, they can focus on whether your proposal actually makes sense for their situation. The opt-out must be genuine, not manipulative. If you say no hard feelings but then follow up with guilt trips or pressure tactics, you'll destroy trust permanently. But when the opt-out is real, it creates psychological safety that often leads to deeper engagement. The deadline dilemma. Deadlines are necessary for action, but they can easily trigger reactance if they feel arbitrary or manipulative. The solution is fair deadlines, time constraints that exist for logical reasons and serve mutual interests. I need your decision by Friday feels like pressure. We need your decision by Friday so we can start implementation Monday and hit your Q3 launch target feels like collaboration. The deadline serves the recipient's goals, not just the requester's convenience. Limited time offer feels like sales manipulation. Pricing holds through Friday because our vendor contracts reset Monday with higher material costs feels like helpful information. The constraint is real and the reason is logical. The language matters as much as the logic. Decision by Friday so we can start Monday is better than you need to decide by Friday so we can start Monday. The first version emphasizes mutual benefit. The second emphasizes your control over their timeline. The could-will distinction. Small word choices can dramatically affect how requests are received. Could suggests possibility and choice. Will suggests certainty and commitment. Both have their place in power politeness, but they serve different functions. Use could when presenting options. We could start with a pilot program, or you could try this approach with one team first. This language preserves autonomy and reduces pressure while still presenting clear possibilities. Use will when confirming decisions. We will start the pilot Monday, or I will send the proposal by Thursday. This language demonstrates commitment and creates accountability once choices have been made. The transition from could to will should happen naturally as the conversation progresses from exploration to commitment. Premature will language can trigger reactance. Excessive could language can seem indecisive. The reason requirement. Every firm request should be paired with a clear reason. This isn't just about the because effect we discussed earlier. It's about respecting the recipient's need to understand the logic behind your ask. I recommend we move forward with option A because it addresses your primary concern about scalability while staying within budget, provides both a clear recommendation and a logical rationale. The recipient can evaluate both the suggestion and the reasoning. We should probably go with option A, provides neither clarity nor rationale. It forces the recipient to guess at your reasoning and assess your confidence level simultaneously. The reason doesn't need to be complex or comprehensive. It just needs to be clear and relevant to the recipient's situation. Because it saves time, because it reduces risk, because it aligns with your Q3 priorities. Simple rationales that connect your request to their interests. The pace mirror. Power politeness requires reading the room and adjusting your communication style to match the situation and the recipient's preferences. Some people prefer direct, rapid-fire communication. Others need time to process and prefer a more measured pace. When someone seems overwhelmed or defensive, slow down your communication. Use more softening language. Provide more rationale. Give them more time to respond. Take your time thinking about this. No rush on my end. When someone seems impatient or action-oriented, speed up your communication. Be more direct. Focus on next steps rather than extensive justification. Bottom line, yes or no on moving forward. The key is flexibility without losing your core message. You can adjust your style and pace while maintaining your essential request and rationale. The authority paradox. The most powerful leaders often use the most polite language. This seems contradictory until you understand the psychology involved. When you have real authority, whether through expertise, position, or track record, you don't need to assert it aggressively. You can afford to be gracious because your competence speaks for itself. When you lack authority, aggressive language often backfires because it highlights the gap between your tone and your actual influence. People resist being told what to do by someone who hasn't earned the right to direct them. Power politeness allows you to exercise influence regardless of your formal authority level. By combining clear recommendations with preserved autonomy, you can guide decisions without triggering resistance. Your power politeness practice. Start by auditing your recent communications for reactance triggers. Look for "you need to," "you have to," or "you must" language. Notice where you've used hedge words like "maybe" or "I think" instead of clear recommendations. Practice the ask, offer, ask structure in your next important request. Invite engagement, provide immediate value, then create a clear next step with preserved choice. Experiment with opt-out language in situations where you normally feel pressure to oversell. Notice how explicitly making it easy to say no often makes people more likely to say yes. Power politeness isn't about being weak or indecisive. It's about being strong enough to preserve others' autonomy while still moving important work forward. It's about earning cooperation rather than demanding compliance. But even the most respectful and clear communication can fail if it doesn't connect with something deeper than logic and process. The next chapter reveals how to transform dry facts into compelling narratives that don't just inform decisions, they inspire them. Chapter 8, Story Logic. The consultant had all the right data. Customer satisfaction scores up 23%. Revenue per client increased 31%. Implementation time cut from 8 weeks to 3. But when she finished her presentation to the executive team, the room felt flat. "Any questions?" she asked. Silence. Not the thoughtful kind that signals deep consideration, but the empty kind that signals disconnection. The CFO checked his phone, the VP of Operations shuffled papers, the CEO nodded politely and said, "We'll review this and get back to you." Thanks, but no thanks. 3 weeks later, I watched a different consultant present to the same executive team. His data was less impressive. Customer satisfaction up 18%, revenue per client increased 24%, implementation time cut from 8 weeks to 4. But something was different about how he delivered it. 6 months ago, he began, the CEO of a mid-market logistics company called me at 11 p.m. on a Friday. His biggest client had just threatened to leave because their shipment tracking was a disaster. Packages were getting lost, customers were furious, and his team was working weekends just to keep up with complaints. The room leaned in, phones went down, papers stopped shuffling. We implemented a simple 3-step tracking system: real-time updates, automated notifications, exception alerts. Within 30 days, customer complaints dropped 67%. The client not only stayed, they doubled their contract. And here's the kicker: the CEO's team went from working weekends to having their evenings back. He paused and looked around the room. So the move is obvious. Stop treating tracking like an afterthought and start treating it like a competitive advantage. Same type of data, same type of outcome, completely different response. The second consultant got a signed contract that afternoon. The difference wasn't the numbers, it was the narrative. The memory technology of facts. Here's what most business communicators miss. Data doesn't stick in memory by itself. It needs a story structure to make it memorable, meaningful, and actionable. Think about the last 10 presentations you've attended. You probably can't remember most of the statistics, but you can likely recall any stories that were told. That's not because stories are more entertaining than data. It's because stories are better technology for encoding and retrieving information. When information is embedded in narrative structure, our brains process it differently. Instead of treating facts as isolated data points, we organize them into cause and effect sequences that feel logical and memorable. Instead of asking, "Is this number accurate?" we ask, "Does this outcome make sense given the situation?" This shift from analytical to narrative thinking reduces counter-arguing and increases acceptance. When people are transported into a story, they temporarily suspend their critical faculties and experience the events as if they were happening to them. But here's the crucial distinction. Business stories aren't entertainment. They're evidence. They're proof that your claims work in the real world with real stakes and real consequences. They transform abstract promises into concrete demonstrations. The SAR architecture. The most powerful business stories follow a simple three-part structure: situation, action, result. This isn't just a storytelling framework. It's a logic framework that mirrors how people naturally think about cause and effect. The situation sets up the context and stakes in one clear sentence, not background information or industry analysis, but the specific challenge that demanded action. The CEO's biggest client threatened to leave because shipment tracking was a disaster. The action describes the decisive intervention in active voice, not a process or methodology, but the specific thing that changed the trajectory. We implemented a simple three-step tracking system with real-time updates, automated notifications, and exception alerts. The result delivers the measurable outcome with numbers and timeline, not vague improvements, but specific deltas that prove the action worked. Within 30 days, customer complaints dropped 67%, the client doubled their contract, and the team stopped working weekends. This structure works because it compresses proof into meaning. Instead of presenting isolated statistics, you're showing how those statistics emerged from real decisions in real situations. Instead of asking people to trust your claims, you're letting them witness your claims in action. The Jobs metaphor mastery. Steve Jobs understood that complex technology needed simple metaphors to become comprehensible and desirable. When he introduced the iPod in 2001, he didn't lead with technical specifications or storage capacity. He led with a metaphor that transformed abstract technology into tangible benefit. 1,000 songs in your pocket. 5 words that reframed everything. Not gigabytes or file formats or digital compression algorithms. A personal music library you could carry anywhere. The metaphor made the technology instantly understandable and immediately desirable. But Jobs didn't stop there. He extended the metaphor through the entire product experience. The scroll wheel mimicked the familiar motion of a physical dial. The interface looked like a stack of albums you could flip through. Even the white earbuds became a visual symbol of the pocket music library concept. The metaphor wasn't decoration, it was architecture. It shaped how people understood the product, how they talked about it, and how they integrated it into their lives. It turned a complex technology into a simple concept that anyone could grasp and share. This is the power of apt metaphor in business communication. The right comparison doesn't just clarify, it illuminates. It helps people see familiar patterns in unfamiliar situations. It makes complex ideas feel simple and abstract benefits feel concrete. The parallel power. Some of the most memorable business stories use parallel structure to create rhythm and emphasis. Malala Yousafzai demonstrated this technique in her Nobel Peace Prize speech when she said, "One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world." The parallel structure, one child, one teacher, one book, one pen, creates a building rhythm that makes the message more powerful than the sum of its parts. Each element reinforces the others, while the repetition makes the entire phrase quotable and memorable. This technique works in business stories too. Instead of saying, "We improved efficiency, reduced costs, and increased customer satisfaction," you might say, "We cut processing time, cut operating costs, and cut customer complaints." The parallel structure makes the achievements feel more connected and more significant. The key is maintaining the same grammatical form throughout the series. All verbs, all nouns, all adjectives. Consistency in structure creates consistency in impact. Plan, execute, measure feels more complete than planning, execution, and measurement. But parallelism must serve meaning, not replace it. The structure should reinforce your message, not distract from it. When rhythm supports substance, both become more powerful. The 60-second standard. Business stories need to be long enough to create transportation, but short enough to maintain attention. The sweet spot is 30 to 60 seconds, enough time to establish situation, action, and result, but not so much time that people start checking their phones. This constraint forces clarity and precision. You can't include every detail or explore every nuance. You have to identify the essential elements that make your point and eliminate everything else. The discipline is valuable because it mirrors how stories actually travel through organizations. When someone retells your story to a colleague, they won't remember every detail. They'll remember the core situation, the key action, and the main result. If your original story contains those elements clearly, it will survive the retelling process intact. 60 seconds also matches the attention span of most business audiences. People can stay focused on a short story even when they're distracted by other priorities. Longer narratives risk losing the audience before the payoff arrives. The evidence echo effect. The most effective business stories don't just illustrate a point, they become the point. When a story is well crafted and strategically placed, people start using it as shorthand for the entire concept you're promoting. Remember, the logistics company story becomes how people refer to your tracking solution. Like that CEO who got his weekends back becomes how they think about work-life balance benefits. The story becomes a mental model that guides future decisions. This happens when the story contains 3 specific elements: relatable stakes, clear causation, and measurable outcomes. The stakes help people see themselves in the situation. The causation helps them understand how the action led to the result. The outcomes help them envision similar benefits in their own context. When all 3 elements align, the story becomes more than evidence. It becomes a template. People start asking, how can we get the same result, instead of, is this result possible? The story shifts the conversation from whether to how. The metaphor fit test. Not every metaphor works in every context. The wrong comparison can confuse rather than clarify, distract rather than illuminate. The key is choosing metaphors that genuinely fit your situation rather than forcing clever comparisons that don't quite work. The fit test is simple. Does the metaphor reveal something essential about your concept, or does it just sound interesting? Our platform is like a Swiss Army knife, might sound clever, but it doesn't help people understand what the platform actually does. Our platform is like a dashboard for customer data, provides a clear mental model for the interface and functionality. The best business metaphors draw from familiar experiences that your audience already understands. Like a GPS for project management works because everyone knows how GPS functions and can immediately grasp how that concept applies to project navigation. Avoid mixed metaphors that combine incompatible images. Our solution is a bridge that opens doors to new opportunities, mixes construction and architecture metaphors in a way that creates confusion rather than clarity. Pick one metaphor family and stick with it throughout your communication. The message line landing. Every business story needs a clear landing, a message line that connects the narrative to the action you want your audience to take. Without this connection, even the most compelling story becomes just an interesting anecdote. The message line should feel like a natural conclusion from the story, not a forced sales pitch. So the move is obvious. Stop treating customer data like a filing cabinet and start treating it like a strategic asset. The story provides the evidence, and the message line provides the application. The language should be direct and actionable. The lesson is clear, or the implication is obvious, or the choice is simple. Phrases that signal you're transitioning from story to strategy, from evidence to action. But the message line must be earned by the story. If your narrative doesn't clearly support your conclusion, the disconnect will be obvious and your credibility will suffer. The story and the message line should feel like 2 parts of the same logical argument. The retelling test. The ultimate measure of a business story is whether other people can retell it accurately without you present. This requires 3 specific qualities: clear structure, memorable details, and obvious relevance. Clear structure means the situation, action, and result are distinct and easy to follow. Memorable details means specific numbers, vivid images, or surprising outcomes that stick in memory. Obvious relevance means the connection to your audience's situation is apparent without explanation. When all three qualities are present, your story becomes viral within your organization. People share it in meetings, reference it in emails, and use it to explain your approach to others. The story becomes a communication asset that works even when you're not there to tell it. Practice your stories out loud before using them in important situations. Stories live or die in the telling, and what looks good on paper doesn't always sound good in speech. Pay attention to rhythm, pacing, and emphasis. Notice where you naturally pause and where you naturally accelerate. Your story architecture practice. Start by identifying 3 key claims you make regularly in your business communications. For each claim, find a real situation where that claim was tested and proven. Build SAR structure around each situation, keeping the entire story under 60 seconds. Choose one apt metaphor for your most complex concept. Test it with colleagues to ensure it clarifies rather than confuses. Refine the metaphor until it feels natural and illuminating. Practice your stories until you can tell them conversationally without notes. Pay attention to which details people remember and which they forget. Adjust your stories based on how they travel through retelling. Stories aren't fluff or entertainment. They're the most powerful technology we have for making facts memorable and meaningful. When you master story logic, your evidence doesn't just inform decisions, it inspires them. But even the most compelling story is just one piece of a larger system. The final chapter reveals how to integrate everything you've learned into a daily practice that transforms not just individual communications, but your entire approach to influence and leadership. Chapter 9. Go Persuade. The transformation happened faster than anyone expected. 6 months earlier, Marcus had been the brilliant engineer everyone respected, but nobody quoted. His technical insights were sound, his analysis was thorough, but his recommendations disappeared into committee discussions and endless email threads. Good ideas, weak delivery, no traction. Then he started applying the 7-move system to every important communication. Not perfectly at first. Old habits die hard, but consistently. Email by email, meeting by meeting, presentation by presentation. The change wasn't dramatic. It was cumulative. His project updates became the template others copied. His budget requests sailed through approval processes that used to take weeks. His technical recommendations started showing up in executive presentations with his exact language intact. By month 6, something remarkable had happened. Marcus wasn't just contributing to decisions, he was shaping them. His words had become the organization's words. His frames had become their frames. His stories had become their stories. The CEO pulled him aside after a board meeting. "I don't know what you've been doing differently, but keep doing it. The board quoted you 3 times today, verbatim." That's the power of systematic persuasion. Not manipulation or coercion, but clarity that compels. Language that lowers resistance and accelerates action. Communication that doesn't just inform, it influences. The 7-move symphony. Let's crystallize what you've learned into a system you can apply immediately. 7 moves that stack into a communication framework leaders use to win minds ethically and efficiently. Fluent Clarity makes thinking easy. 1 sentence that states your core ask in 18 words or less. Concrete nouns and active verbs. Point first, proof second, detail optional. When comprehension is effortless, agreement becomes more likely. Frame. Power shapes choices before content arrives. Fair, anchors tied to relevant benchmarks. Gain or loss framing matched to audience psychology. Near or far language matched to decision distance. The lens you choose determines the decision they make. Precision proof earns trust through exactness. Specific numbers with clear sources. Because clauses that connect requests to outcomes. Identity-aligned language that makes follow-through feel natural. Vague claims invite skepticism. Precise claims create gravity. Prime and repeat makes messages stick. Pre-hooks that focus attention before content lands. 3-beat spines repeated at open, midpoint, close. Parallel structure that reduces cognitive load and increases recall. What gets remembered gets repeated. Social levers reduce uncertainty through peer proof. Relevant examples from similar situations with measurable outcomes. Reciprocity that gives value before asking for commitment. Micro-commitments that predict larger commitments. Real constraints with logical reasons. Power politeness preserves autonomy while maintaining authority. Ask-offer-ask scaffolding that invites rather than demands. Clear recommendations without coercive pressure. Opt-outs that make saying no feel safe. Deadlines with rationales that serve mutual interests. Story logic compresses proof into meaning. Situation-action-result narratives that demonstrate claims and action. Apt metaphors that make complex concepts instantly graspable. Message lines that connect evidence to action. Stories that travel beyond the room and influence decisions you never see. Each move builds on the previous ones. Each move amplifies the others. Together, they create communication that doesn't just get heard, it gets internalized and acted upon. Your new communication superpower. When you master this system, 3 fundamental shifts happen in how people respond to your ideas. First, you control conversations without dominating them. You set frames, establish standards, and guide next steps, but you do it so naturally that others feel like they're discovering your conclusions rather than being sold them. Your influence feels like insight, not pressure. Second, you earn default trust in high-stakes situations. Your words signal competence, preparation, and reliability. When you speak, people lean in because they know you'll make complex things clear and hard decisions easier. Your communication becomes a risk reduction tool for everyone in the room. Third, you move faster with fewer meetings. Clean yes or no outcomes replace endless maybe loops. Decisions happen in days instead of weeks because your requests are clear, your rationale is sound, and your next steps are obvious. Clarity accelerates everything. But the benefits extend beyond professional efficiency. This system improves relationships by reducing friction and increasing alignment. When you preserve autonomy while providing direction, people feel respected rather than controlled. When you use shared language and repeated stories, teams stay unified around common goals. When you make progress visible through precise metrics, effort feels meaningful rather than futile. The Apple Playbook. Steve Jobs didn't just use these principles occasionally, he systematized them across every product launch, every keynote, every major communication. His approach demonstrates how consistent application of persuasive language principles can reshape entire markets. Fluent Clarity, 1,000 songs in your pocket instead of 5 GB storage capacity. Complex technology became simple benefit. Technical specifications became life upgrades. Frame power, $999, actually $499, instead of just announcing the price. The anchor made the actual price feel like a bargain rather than an expense. Precision proof, all-day battery life became 10 hours of video playback with specific usage scenarios. Vague promises became measurable commitments. Prime and repeat. Think different wasn't just advertising, it was a cognitive frame repeated across years of communication. The phrase primed audiences to expect innovation before products were even revealed. Social levers, early adopter programs, and exclusive previews created authentic scarcity while building community identity around being first to embrace the future. Power politeness. We think you're going to love it instead of you need this product. Confident recommendations that preserved choice and dignity. Story logic. Every product launch included customer stories that demonstrated real-world impact, not just features and benefits, but transformation narratives that made benefits feel inevitable. The system worked because it was systematic. Jobs didn't rely on inspiration or charisma. He relied on repeatable language patterns that consistently produced the same psychological effects: clarity, desire, urgency, and action, every time. The result wasn't just successful product launches. It was cultural influence that extended far beyond Apple. Jobs' language patterns became the template for how technology companies communicate with customers. His frames became industry frames. His stories became category stories. Your immediate action plan. Here's how to start building your own systematic approach to persuasive communication. Pick one live message you need to send this week: an important email, a project update, a budget request, a team announcement, something with real stakes and real consequences. Run it through the 7-move chain. Start with fluent clarity. Compress your core ask into one clear sentence. Add frame power. Choose your anchor and your lens. Layer in precision proof, specific numbers with clear because clauses. Include a pre-hook and a memorable spine. Add relevant peer proof or identity alignment. Use ask-offer-ask structure with preserved autonomy. Seal it with a 30-second SAR story. Send it today. Then capture what happens. Notice how people respond differently when your message flows through their mental circuits instead of creating friction. Watch how specific phrases get quoted back to you in replies. Pay attention to how quickly decisions happen when requests are clear and rationale is sound. Then do it again tomorrow and the day after that. Not because the system is complicated, it's not, but because systematic application creates systematic results. Each communication builds your reputation for clarity. Each clear message makes the next one more likely to succeed. The compound effect. The real power of this system emerges through repetition. When you consistently apply these principles, something remarkable happens. Your communication style becomes your professional brand. Scripts become defaults. Instead of starting from scratch every time, you edit proven templates. Your one-sentence promises become sharper. Your frames become more precise. Your stories become more compelling. The system gets easier to use as it becomes more natural. Stakeholders learn your cadence. They start expecting clarity from your communications and trusting your recommendations. They know that when you speak, you'll make their decisions easier rather than harder. Your influence compounds because your reliability is proven. Your phrases become cultural assets. The language you choose starts showing up in other people's communications. Your frames become their frames. Your stories become their stories. Your influence spreads through the organization, carried by the very words you chose to express your ideas. This isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming a more effective version of yourself. The principles work because they align with how human psychology actually functions. They reduce cognitive load, preserve autonomy, and make important information memorable and actionable. The moment of truth. You now have everything you need to transform how people respond to your ideas. 7 moves that stack into systematic influence. A framework that works whether you're writing emails or delivering keynotes. Language patterns that reduce resistance and accelerate action. But knowledge without application is just entertainment. The system only works if you work the system. So here's your moment of truth. Will you bookmark this book and return to your old communication habits, or will you choose one message today and run it through the 7-move chain? The difference between knowing and doing is the difference between admiration and transformation, between understanding principles and changing outcomes, between having good ideas and making good ideas happen. Your words are your most powerful tool for creating change in the world. They can open doors or close them. They can build trust or breed doubt. They can create action or cause confusion. But when you choose the right words in the right order for the right reasons, something magical happens. Hard things become easy. Complex decisions become clear choices. Resistance turns into momentum. You become the person whose words make things happen. The leader whose recommendations get implemented. The professional whose ideas travel beyond the room and influence decisions you never see. Cut the fluff, set the frame, prove it precisely, prime it to stick, respect their freedom, tell a tight story. Start today. Momentum compounds. Your voice becomes an advantage you can bank on. The room is waiting. Your message is ready. Go persuade.